Let's dive into a chapter of history that's often overlooked. We're talking about a time when one African nation took this incredibly radical, uncompromising stand on the world stage and wasn't afraid to challenge superpowers in the fight against apartheid. This is the story of Nigeria's defiant foreign policy.
So that was the view from Washington. Before they even took power, the guys who would soon lead Nigeria were already seen as a major threat to the established order. But why? What was it about these men that made them seem so dangerous in the eyes of American diplomats? Okay, so picture this. It's 1975. Nigeria is on the brink of a military coup that's going to bring two army brigadiers to power, Murtala Muhammed and Olusegun Obasanjo. And believe me, long before this, the U.S. State Department had been watching them very, very closely. Declassified U.S. cables from that time, they really reveal some pretty stark assessments. Muhammad was seen as impetuous and ruthless. Obasanjo, on the other hand, they described him as a strong-willed egocentric. So two very different personalities, right? But they were absolutely united by one powerful conviction. And this was it. This was their common ground. The cables noted that both of these men shared this deep, emotional, and totally uncompromising commitment to ending colonialism and white minority rule in Africa. And they predicted that, if it came to a showdown, the U.S. and its allies would probably end up siding with the racist regimes in South Africa and Rhodesia. So the U.S. Embassy basically laid it all out. They predicted that a government led by these two would be fundamentally anti-West, that it would take a much harder line on Southern Africa, and that it would absolutely lead to friction with Washington. And you know what? They were right on every single count. The stage was well and truly set for a massive shift. It didn't take long for this new, radical policy to be unleashed on a pretty unsuspecting world, and it all came to a head at this one pivotal meeting of African leaders. So the big issue on the table was Angola. The MPLA, which was backed by the Soviets and Cubans, had just taken power, and the other African nations were completely divided on whether to recognize them or not. I mean, it was a classic Cold War proxy battle, with Africa stuck right in the middle. Then, just before the summit, U.S. President Gerald Ford sends this letter to all the African heads of state, basically warning them against recognizing the MPLA. For Nigeria's new leader, Murtala Muhammed, this was the absolute last straw. He was personally offended by what he saw as a superpower trying to lecture Africans on their own affairs. The whole world was watching. Was Nigeria, Africa's most populous nation, going to fall in line with Washington, or was it going to forge its own path? Well, Muhammad took the podium, and he delivered a speech that would just echo across the entire continent. He did not pull any punches. He directly accused the United States of choosing to side with white supremacy over the forces of African self-determination. It was just a stunning, direct rebuke of a global superpower. And then he delivered the line that would define his legacy and this whole new era for Nigeria. Africa has come of age. It was a declaration of independence, of agency, of defiance, and it sent absolute shockwaves through the diplomatic world. The impact was immediate. The speech was a total sensation, and it swung the entire OAU summit in favor of recognizing the MPLA. Nigeria had just firmly established itself as the unapologetic leader of the anti-Apartheid movement on the continent. Tragically, just 1 month after that historic speech, Murtala Muhammed was assassinated in an attempted coup. But the policy, it didn't die with him. His number two, Olusegun Obasanjo, took over. And he didn't just continue the policy, he escalated it. And this wasn't just talk. Obasanjo's government took real, decisive action. In 1976, Nigeria led the boycott of the Montreal Olympics. In 1977, they hosted a huge anti-apartheid conference. And then in 1979, in a move that absolutely stunned the world, they nationalized the assets of British Petroleum for its dealings with South Africa. These were concrete, costly actions that backed up the tough talk. This new, assertive posture was just perfectly symbolized by this one moment. Apparently, Murtala Muhammed took this mischievous delight in seeing this photo of his towering foreign minister, Joseph Garba, literally looking down on the famously powerful U.S. Secretary of State, Henry Kissinger. It was like a visual metaphor for Nigeria's whole new relationship with the West. And this quote from Obasanjo, it just perfectly captures the entire philosophy of the regime. Just being outraged wasn't enough anymore. The time for simply watching from the sidelines was over. The time to act had arrived. So, what was the lasting impact of this short but incredibly pivotal period in Nigerian and really all of African history? Well, the impact was profound. Nigeria started pouring money and logistical support into liberation movements. It gave critical moral support to the frontline states, who were really bearing the brunt of apartheid's aggression. The recognition of the MPLA was decisive. Many believe it prevented a South African takeover of Angola. They really cemented their role as a true leader in the Pan-African struggle. Now look, it's really important to say that the domestic rule of Muhammed and Obasanjo was complex, and it was not without its own controversies. But if we focus specifically on their foreign policy, their principled and unwavering contribution to the fight for Black African liberation is just undeniable. Ultimately, this story serves as such a powerful reminder. It's a reminder of a time when an African nation, guided by principle, was willing to challenge the entire global order, defy superpowers, and play a truly decisive role in shaping the destiny of its continent. So it leaves us with a really critical question to think about. How does remembering this history, a history not of victimhood, but of powerful African agency, change the way we tell the story of the fight against apartheid and the broader struggle for liberation?